I know you wanted to kind of talk about the value and the benefit of that routine monitoring as well. Do you want to talk to us about the monitoring concept within NOVOPSYCH?
Yeah, so we as healthcare providers like to believe that we're doing good for our clients, and the vast majority of us hopefully are. And we know that we presume that we're doing good for our clients because as we practice evidence-based practice. So there's evidence, there's research trials saying psychological therapy is effective. What I'm passionate about is not only basing practice on the research, but actually doing practice-based evidence rather than just evidence-based practice. And so that's monitoring client outcomes at the beginning, middle, and end of treatment. And so that the clinician ourselves can be empowered by the data we're collecting and say, right, well, what are my outcomes for this type of patient with this type of problem? So that we can see which types of clients we're doing a great job at and could potentially specialize in, and which we get stuck in and perhaps need to work harder at.
So, so that sort of goes down to the effectiveness of the treatment. Absolutely.
And so, with the tools baked into the NOVOPSYCH, you're able to see how effective treatment is being with clients. And, we usually use our intuition to figure this stuff out. And, we intuitively get a sense about whether the client is benefiting. But the research evidence shows that trained professionals are terrible at actually using intuition to accurately measure how their clients are going, partly because of, our memories, human beings' memories are not so good. And so we find it difficult to remember how the client was at the beginning of treatment compared to at the end. The great thing about, computers and NOVOPSYCH is NOVOPSYCH doesn't forget. And so it's able to objectively measure where the client was at the very beginning, the middle, and the end. And the feedback that I get from clients constantly when doing this is they're really staggered about their improvement, because the improvements tend to be slow and gradual over time. And so they're subtle to pick, that we're not very good at picking them up ourselves. But when you can see it graphed out clearly in a platform like NOVOPSYCH, where you can see the symptoms reducing over time, then it can really show, aha, this treatment has benefited me.
I'm going to put a screenshot of that up, Ben, because I think that's a really solid point. So you've got this objective measure that is now gradually growing across the time series, where you're actually able to. It's a contemporaneous measure, isn't it? It's something that you're not reconstructing, 3 months later in retrospect. It's actually something that is being documented at around about the same time as the progress. Yeah,
exactly right. Exactly right. Where human beings are not the best historians, and in the graph that you're showing now, we can see that the symptoms on the blue line, I think this is measuring different facets of anxiety, and so the blue line I think is measuring social anxiety, and so that was very high at the start. And then in the most recent administration, we can see that that's reduced a great deal. And when that happened, and also tracking back and saying, okay, so why now are you better? What are the conditions that are currently conducive to your mental well-being, and what was wrong with back then that was making it more difficult to feel good? And so we're able to be sort of like detectives and say, back, last year you were feeling great. Why was that? And some really interesting stuff comes out where we can see clearly that, I don't know, when a 20-year-old's moved out of home from their parents, they suddenly feel better. We can go, aha, we can see this clearly on the graphs. Or sometimes when someone started taking antidepressant medication, we can see a clear before and after. They were scoring super high on the assessments before they started taking the medication. Then afterwards, it reduces significantly. And And of course, with objective psychometric measurements, this becomes really clear.
How customizable are the forms for different areas of mental health? You're making mention to some of the differences in the types of surveys and forms used in Australia versus other jurisdictions, or preferred in different jurisdictions. How broadly does NOVOPSYCH work across all areas of mental health care?
So we've got a vast library of assessments. We've got 40 or 50 assessments built into NOVOPSYCH, measuring many things. And so we've tried to have a pretty good spectrum of measurements. A few things to keep in mind with these measurements is that there is a big difference between a good measurement and just a survey. There's a science around creating surveys and creating psychometric assessments, and so NOVOPSYCH only includes the best, most reliable, and most validated assessment tools, because we want to keep the data fidelity really good in NOVOPSYCH, and so we know that we're measuring something meaningful, clinically relevant, which has sound scientific validation. So you won't see sort of any airy-fairy, what personality type are you, or sort of online quiz that don't have much validation on NOVOPSYCH. And so there's really a menu of assessment tools that the clinicians can choose from, and different clinicians will have different tastes and choose from the menu accordingly.
So in terms of so you've sort of spelled out that alliance, the value proposition around building that alliance, getting that kind of evidence-based approach that across a timeline we're able to either see improvements or perhaps even lack of improvements, and use some of those data points to hone in on the things that have been working and the things that perhaps haven't been working, and that's really helping build that alliance and really get down to areas of therapy that can be very effective. So when that kind of, that scenario is between the practitioner and the client, and is NOVOPSYCH being used at a practice level broadly, to look at either characteristics across a cohort of clients, or perhaps across areas of different specializations within mental health care?
Yeah, absolutely. So most users of NOVOPSYCH are individual clinicians who just want to track their own patients, but there is also a growing cohort of larger practices and mental health organizations using NOVOPSYCH broadly as part of their intervention system. And then what they can do with the data in NOVOPSYCH is the practice manager or data analytics person within that organization can download the data and analyze it and cut it lots of different ways to get a really clear sense about, as an organization at large, what's happening. And we're finding that this is really important for practices, large practices that want to get government tenders. So sometimes there's big pools of money that the government puts out saying, all right, we're looking for an organization to provide services for this vulnerable group, and there's, $500,000 up for grabs. And practices who have been routinely collecting their outcomes, reporting on their outcomes, are using that in the government tender process to say, hey, look, we don't just say that we're benefiting clients, the rock solid data is showing that we are. And then also when they're tendering, they're saying, and as part of our tender, we are going to continue the process of looking at all of these analytics through NOVOPSYCH, so that by the end of that service provision period set out in the tender, we'll be able to report back with some solid data for you. And so as the mental health funding environment evolves, there's more and more of an emphasis on being accountable to with data. And so yeah, more and more people are doing that.
So that means that you're able to deal with it one-to-one. So between the practitioner and the client, you're able to deal with it across a team of practitioners. You're able to deal with it between a practitioner and the type of statistics they're generating across their clients, so sort of their portfolio of clients that they're working with. So it's really clever the way that kind of, is able, the view goes from one-to-one, one to many, many to many. There's a lot of valuable insights there. In digital health, we're concerned with, how there's this ever-growing complexity in determinants of healthcare, and with there's a proliferation of data out there, some of which we call dark data, which is being generated but nobody's looking at. And then there's data that's actually being used in analytics and metrics to actually be useful in decision making and informing outcomes, for example. So I love the various layers that you can sort of use NOVOPSYCH in different contexts.